Okay, Leslie, Kamari, anyone else who might have missed the lesson can watch this. We're going to look at our next poem today. This is a real famous one called Casey at the Bat. You notice that this is a very different poem from the last one we read and many others. You notice that it's much longer than any of the other poems that we've read. This is called a narrative poem. It's a poem that actually tells a story. Okay, and this is called Casey at the Bat. And I think it'll be helpful if we look at these questions first before we start the poem. So let's take a look at this. Now it says, this poem is too complex to understand completely without hearing and reading it multiple times. So they're saying this poem is really long and it's too, when they say complex, they mean it's not very simple. The meanings might be hard to find in here, all right? However, you'll understand a great deal on just your first experience with the poem. The following questions will help you show just how much you actually understand about the poem, like the first time you read it. So let's look at this. I want you to be thinking about these questions. Who is the poem's main character? What sport does he play? Why do the fans want Casey to come up to bat? What happens when Casey does come up to bat? So we already know who the main character is, Casey. And when it says come up to bat, it should give you a pretty good clue of what sport he plays. All right. So let's read this. And again, it's very complex and challenging, but it's a good poem also. This is called Casey at the Bat by Ernest Lawrence Thayer. The outlook wasn't brilliant for the Mudville Nine that day. The score stood 4-2 with but one inning more to play. And then when Cooney died at first, and Barrows did the same, a sickly silence fell upon the patrons of the game. A straggling few got up to go in deep despair. The rest clung to the hope which springs eternal in the human breast. Focus. They thought if only Casey could get a whack at that, we'd put up even money now with Casey at the bat. But Flynn preceded Casey, as did also Jimmy Blake, and the former was a hoodoo, while the latter was a cake. So upon that stricken multitude grim melancholy sat, for there seemed but little chance of Casey getting to the bat. But Flynn let drive a single, to the wonderment of all, and Blake, the much despised, tore the cover off the ball. And when the dust had lifted, and men saw what had occurred, there was Jimmy safe at second, and Flynn a hugging third. Then from 5,000 throats and more there rose a lusty yell. It rumbled through the valley, it rattled in the dell, it pounded on the mountain, and recoiled upon the flat, for Casey, mighty Casey, was advancing to the bat. There was ease in Casey's manner as he stepped into his place. There was pride in Casey's bearing, and a smile lit Casey's face. And when, responding to the cheers, he lightly doffed his hat, no stranger in the crowd could doubt 'twas Casey at the bat. 10,000 eyes were on him as he rubbed his hands with dirt. 5,000 tongues applauded when he wiped them on his shirt. Then while the writhing pitcher ground the ball into his hip, defiance flashed in Casey's eye, a sneer curled Casey's lip. And now the leather-covered sphere came hurtling through the air, and Casey stood watching it in haughty grandeur there. Close by the sturdy batsman the ball unheeded sped. That ain't my style, said Casey. Strike one, the umpire said. From the benches black with people there went up a muffled roar, like the beating of the storm waves on a stern and distant shore. Kill him! Kill the umpire! Shouted someone on the stand, and it's likely they'd have killed him had not Casey raised his hand. With a smile of Christian charity, great Casey's visage shone. He stilled the rising tumult, he bade the game go on. He signaled to the pitcher, and once more the dun sphere flew. But Casey still ignored it, and an umpire said, "Strike two." "Fraud!" cried the maddened thousands, who echoed and answered, "Fraud!" But one scornful look from Casey, and the audience was awed. They saw his face grow stern and cold. They saw his muscles strain. And they knew that Casey wouldn't let that ball go by again. The sneer is gone from Casey's lips. His teeth are clenched in hate. He pounds with cruel violence his bat upon the plate. And now the pitcher holds the ball, and now he lets it go. And now the air is shattered by the force of Casey's blow. Oh, somewhere in this favored land the sun is shining bright. The band is playing somewhere, and somewhere hearts are light. And somewhere men are laughing, and somewhere children shout. There is no joy in Mudville. Mighty Casey has struck out. Hey, that is Mighty Casey. Casey at the bat. All right, so take a moment and think. You should already know these things. Who's the main character? It's Casey. All right. And if you want to try and answer these yourself, you can pause the video right now and see how much you actually know from the poem, even though it's really long and really difficult to understand. Okay, what sport does Casey play? Plays baseball. There's all kinds of clues to tell you he plays baseball. Why do the fans want Casey to come up to bat? Apparently, he's a really good player. He's a really good batter. And they need him to win the game, right? Because they're behind. Okay. What happens when Casey does come up to bat? If you noticed, he strikes out. Right? So that's really simple. Casey's a baseball player that everybody really wants him to get up there because he's so good, and they think he can get up there and win the game, but he doesn't. He strikes out. That basically summarizes the whole poem. Okay? Now, this we are not going to worry about. Let's go over here and talk about our poetic devices. Remember, when we've looked at other poems in the past, we've talked about different types of poetic devices like rhyming, um, alliteration. Like here in stanzas 1 and 2, the phrase sickly silence and deep despair are examples of what poetic device? That's alliteration, right? Poets often use alliteration to add emphasis to a certain detail. Look back at the first two sentences, last two, look at the, sorry, look back at the first two stanzas of Casey at the Bat. Why might the sickly silence and deep despair be, be important things to emphasize here? Sickly silence and deep despair, these things show how the crowd feels, right? That's why they need to emphasize them. The crowd is really um, upset, unhappy. Despair means to be really upset. They're in despair because they are not winning the game. So you can use alliteration to really emphasize that. There's a sickly silence. Everybody's quiet and they feel terrible. And there's a deep despair, like, oh man, we're losing. So they put those they use alliteration on those to really emphasize it, that the crowd really is unhappy right now because they're losing. Stanza 4 describes how Blake tore the cover off the ball. The poet uses figurative language here. Blake did not really tear up the ball. What is the figurative meaning of this statement? What do they mean by that? He didn't really tear the cover off the ball. What they mean is he hit it really hard. He didn't just get a hit, he hit the ball really hard. So that's a saying in baseball. Oh man, he tore the cover off the ball. That's a way of saying he hit the ball really hard. All right. So go through and look at these questions take some time and try answering them. Pause this if you need to, and then come back and see what answers you come up with, and see if you agree with what answers I come up with. All right. So in stanza 9, the poet writes, "There went up a muffled roar, like beating of the storm waves on a stern and distant shore." It says, read each word carefully. What poetic device is used here? Name the word that helps you know this. Let's see. There's a simile. Simile being used. What word? The word like. When we hear that word like, we know there's a simile being made. If you notice, there's another poetic device. There's rhyming going on, right? Roar and shore rhyme. So on the lines, these lines up here in question 4, they compare two different things. Did you see what they were? They compare a roar of the crowd, the muffled roar, with storm waves, right? Storm waves on the ocean. How are those two things compared by the lines? How are they similar? Well, a muffled roar and storm waves, they can both be very loud, right? In stanza 13, repeats the word somewhere many times. Circle the word every time it appears in the stanza. Let's see how many times it appears. Let's go. So back to this stanza 13. It's the last stanza, I believe. Yep. Somewhere once, somewhere twice, 3, 4, 5, 5. I see it repeated 5 times. So why do they repeat it? What's the point? 5 times, right? So this is another device. He's using repetition. We know that poets often use repetition to focus on important details. Why might the author use this poem? Why might the author of this poem want to focus on somewhere in the stanza? Why do you think? I think because right I think the right now, they just lost. Casey struck out, so they're sad. So when you think of other places, this is such a sad place right now. So it's like somewhere, it seems like somewhere else would be such a better place to be, right, than right here. This is such a miserable place. So they lost the game, right? So this is a really sad place. Right? So when they say somewhere else, like, gosh, I wish we were somewhere else. Somewhere there's happiness, right? So maybe we wish we were somewhere else. Right? So this is a really long poem. Whoops, sorry, you didn't see that. You missed that whole thing, didn't you? So we know the poem, they use the word somewhere over and over again. They use repetition. And why do they say somewhere 5 times? Because they think they lost the game, so this is really sad where they are. So maybe they're thinking there's so many other places that are happier than this place right now that we'd rather be. So they use somewhere over and over again. There's lots of devices. There's similes, there's metaphors, comparing things, there's alliteration, and there's rhyme. All through this poem, there's rhyme, right? In this long poem. This is called a narrative poem. It tells a story. It's longer than the other ones. It's got a lot of details. And like you said, you might not understand the whole thing, but you might understand the basics. The simple fact is, they were losing the baseball game, and everybody knew, geez, if Casey can get up, he's such a great batter, a great hitter, he'll win the game for us. But then he doesn't. He strikes out, and they lose. It's just that simple, right? but the poet did a great job of making it much more descriptive and interesting. So we will work more on this type of poetry in our next lesson. This will be a much bigger job than the other poems we've done. So hopefully you're getting your other poems done so you can focus on this one.